if you're lucky, you'll eventually get to a point where it's in your autopilot. But we're 20 years in, we're nowhere near that. So
you're still not at autopilot?
No.
It was really funny. He said that he had this idea for this, and then you had come back, you had one highlights, you look at a server, and you had basically given up on career, you had made no money, you were just going to be a surfer, right? And he went to you to say, I want to start this idea, and then what do you do?
Yeah, so I spent 7 years at Yahoo building stuff for them across Southeast Asia, like 40, 50 verticals in 10 countries. I've been keeping a list of what I thought were good business ideas for my life after Yahoo. And Yahoo bought this little travel metasearch in the US that we folded into Yahoo Travel, and I thought that was kind of a cool idea. And I was one of about 20 different businesses I was thinking about. And then Craig and I had a mutual friend who connected us, so we sort of started kicking around the idea. And my initial response to Craig was, yeah, this is interesting, but I don't really want to work full time, or at least not yet. But we kept talking and working with one another, and here we are 20 years later. So.
Okay, but here's the untold story. He's not telling me the story. So what Ross did was, okay, I'll give you $50,000. You go and do it, I will be an investor, right? And Craig said, no, I don't want your money. I want you to be my co-founder to run it.
Well, they did take your money.
That's good, man. You took the money and then you got it as a co-founder. And now the irony is that you have never worked as hard in your life the last 4 years, right? From being a server to working the last 3 years. Would you say it's been a really tough ride?
Yeah, I mean, we worked pretty hard in Algo in the early days. But yeah, we're actually at peak now, so we were getting similar, talking about to a whole bunch of founders and potential founders. And if you're looking for the easy life, you're looking for work-life balance, don't start a company. If you're lucky, you'll eventually get to a point where it's in your autopilot. But we're 20 years in, we're nowhere near that. So
you're still not at autopilot?
No.
So this last 20 years, I mean, do you wish that you hadn't listened to him, that you just given him the money and ride?
I think it's been a pretty satisfying journey. I mean, like all businesses, there's been ups and downs, and we've nearly gone out of business multiple times, and there's few times payroll's gone on the Amex, and COVID was a bit of a near-death experience for us. We had a payroll of close to $1 million a month, no revenue coming in. And we had a bit put away for a rainy day, but it rained for a lot of days, so that was stressful. I think we had 300 plus people at the time who were depending on us to try and figure out a way to keep the plane in there.
So how did you manage to hold on to the team? I mean, I know you kept all your team and all that, and how did you manage to get them through it? Did you give them stock options?
Yeah, so
how did you think about it?
We took a slightly different approach to a lot of travel companies. So we spent a lot of time building up the team, and we also have a lot of people working for us in a lot of locations where there's extended families that kind of depend on income deeply. So what we did instead, we went to our board of shareholders and said, we'll go out and quickly raise money. We want to keep most of the team together, and here's the plan stuff that we want to build, and be ready to launch when the cloud's clear, people start traveling again. And so we went and raised the money pretty quickly at the start of COVID in the Middle East with people like family offices, men who already know us and who were sort of bullish on travel long term. But that actually, we succeeded raising from these people in the Gulf already knows, after we'd gone and spoken to with 50 institutional investors worldwide, who'd basically given up on the travel sector. So it was pretty demoralizing talking to investors over a period. But anyway, we got the blessing of the board to go and raise some money. Everybody got diluted effectively. We asked everybody to take some pay cuts, but we gave all staff, back, made up the delta in equity. So everybody was working in Wego through COVID, now shell. And we had some difficult conversations with people that we owe money to. So Google, Meta, Amazon, one which, so some of those got pushed out, which has made it quite whole. And we basically kept the team together and probably worked harder for COVID than we did at any other time, because we wanted to make sure when things got, we were able to launch new stuff.
When I first met you, you were quite you're a product guy. You like to be the factory coding and building stuff. And you're not naturally a limelight kind of guy, right? So
I didn't sort of fix up reluctantly, but
yes. So how do you, like for a lot of founders, that I meet in the tech space, tend to be quite introverted, prefer to be in back room, working rather than being in the spotlight. So how did you make that transition, to really meet investors, be on stage, telling your story?
Yeah, I mean, I don't get on stage that often, so if they do it, I mean, it's important for it. So.
Oh, you got on stage often. It's not.
Yeah, often enough. But clearly it's not something particularly.
But you have to train yourself, so I know a lot of founders always ask you that question. I get very nervous on stage. I don't like to be in the limelight, but they know they have to. So how do you do it? How do you overcome that?
Do it by doing that.
Do it by doing it? Okay.
With investors specifically, it's a lot easier. So it's typically small group one-on-one conversations, and I think investors like talking to founders that don't necessarily like when you get into the public markets. You typically got a investor relations team, a team of PR people, and they're actually the interface between the founders and the investors. But as long as you're private, you're typically dealing directly, and the investors like dealing directly with founders. And I think the less polished you are, often the better. Like they're looking for an unstilted insight into a company.
So you won't be too polished. Often people respond to you when you're, more neutral rather than too polished. So what other untold stories can we learn about you as you went to the Middle East, right? That was a really funny moment for your business.
History, we started in metasearch Southeast Asia about 20 years ago. In retrospect, we were really too early for this part of the world with that model. To make metasearch to do their marketplace model, you need a critical number of sellers, and I just didn't resist. I think Suji was the only OTA operator in the region at the time. One seller doesn't mean client, and they were even technically challenged. So we had a choice. We either tip it along. It's kind of a trouble with it. So Meta wasn't working, so they created a and a big success out of that. We pivoted geographically. So we launched a bunch of different languages and countries, and the Middle East started to take off, so we started studying and we realized it was wide open. And when we compared Middle East to Southeast Asia, the acquisition costs were similar, but the revenues are at 4 or 5x. It's kind of a function of high basket values, high frequencies.
Was that kind of an accident you stumbled on the Middle East, or was that a very deliberate decision that, you looked at it and said, okay, this is not working, we're gonna have to abandon it, or not abandon it, but we have to go somewhere else? So it's a very deliberate decision.
I mean, internally we talked about it as sort of going global, right? So we got a list of all the countries of the world, how many people were online, how many are going to be online 5 years, and then we dimensioned it by language. We just said we'd be down to 90-50 percentile who want to support. And then we spent a lot of time building up the product to do that. And got a lot of traction in the Middle East. So those countries, those languages start taking off, so you start paying attention. So if you define the Middle East as sort of the Arabic-speaking world, it's about 450 million people. A lot of companies, they bolt on Pakistan, bolt on Turkey. So in terms of sheer number of people, it starts off with a lot like Southeast Asia. The core most companies focus on in the travel industry are in the Gulf, like the GCC, so Saudi, UAE, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, which is at 60 million people, average income, approximately the same as Singapore or Hong Kong. So high income, people travel all the time, really high frequencies. So the very young population's got the opposite demographics of East Asia. So East Asia is sort of aging, sort of looking at China, Korea, Taiwan, China, Singapore, Malaysia, I don't know, but the pyramid is inverted. So the Middle East is the opposite. The average age across the Middle East is about 28. Mm-hmm. So, and growing. So they're importing a lot of people from a lot of different parts of the world and Gulf. So, TAM, the total addressable market, drives a function of population growth. It's a function of fairly high GDP growth, but also just the sheer importing people. So the next population is growing pretty rapidly. It's very like from a travel point of view, we've got some of the world's best airlines based there. We've got Emirates and Qatar slogging at Etihad and Turkish Airways, Saudia. The Saudis are setting up a new airline, Riyadh Air, which is the aim to compete with Emirates. So from the point of view of a travel agency or a meta, it's great. You've got these really well-funded global airlines all competing. There's about 10 low-cost carriers, based in a flying in and out of region for all competing. So it's great to be a traveler in the Middle East. It's very competitive. Some great destinations. You've got Saudi and UAE who are trying to diversify their economies away from oil, and they're taking these massive sovereign wealth funds and investing in travel tourism and building hubs and destinations.
I went to Riyadh and Jeddah last year, and I was just blown away by the energy of the place, but especially also the energy of the young women. Who suddenly see all responsibilities open up that were never opened them before, and their energy and their creativity, setting up small businesses, tours and arts and all that, just kind of moving actually. When it was really awe-inspiring. And why is this a really exciting time to be in travel tech right now? And how could this? Okay, 3 years you take a Wego to this point now, right? And so where do you see tech? Will it accelerate even faster, or will it basically allow new players to come in and disrupt?
Yeah, so if I think about this journey, like beyond us, there's been a couple of inflection points along the way. The original, the internet modems connecting, BBSs, that was big for me. I think the web was the first time we became involved for commerce. That's and next is mobile. So that was another sort of like big probably changed the way people use tech. When we started Wego, we had to first go and figure out how to afford to buy rank forward servers. Nobody does that anymore because you get the Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, and they just went to zero. So the cloud changed the game in a pretty meaningful way. All the way through this was like democratizing, right? So it was like lowering the barrier to entry, allowing you to focus on differentiating stuff instead of like just heavy lifting infrastructure. And I think AI is going to be the same. So AI is a massive accelerant and enabler. So up until 2 years ago, if you wanted to build an app for your phone, for iOS, you had to go and study Swift, and you had to study the Apple user interface guidelines, and you had to probably hire a designer and the developer, and 3 months later, if you're lucky, you had an app that you know, if you can think in a, think like a product manager, think a little bit in a structured fashion like an engineer, you've got a good idea and you find some good references, you can probably crank it out with assistance of AI by midnight. So that's.
So there's now things like a product. You
So you
say that all of us have to think like a product manager. I mean, a product designer.
Yeah, AIs are incredible, but they're not magic, right? So you still have to tell them what you want in a nice, clear, and succinct fashion in a style that they're going to be able to give you all together. So, actually, invite your colleagues to this drinks thing. So, last Thursday of the month, it'd be good if we could fill a room and sort of make this sort of a hub for everybody in the industry once a month.
We really believe in spreading the love of travel and the love of tech across the world. So we need everybody's help, to make that happen, right? I mean, we can only be the catalyst, but we need everybody to make it happen.